Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Doomloop Dispatch, the show that covers the worst parts of the San Francisco Bay Area. I am your host, Kevin L. Jones, and with me whenever possible is...
Scott Miller.
It's all right. We're all kind of stumbling around because...
Yeah, a little bit of
But we are so excited. This is the episode we've been waiting for so long to do. We are so honored to have Cal law professor and former district attorney of San Francisco, Chesa Boudin, with us. Hello, Chesa.
Hey, Kevin. Great to be with you all. Great to meet you, and looking forward to the conversation today.
Right on.
Wonderful. Yes. Yeah. We got a lot of questions for you. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. First off, want to get your opinions because you've gone through the same thing. How hard was it to watch Pamela Price get recalled?
You know, it's just frustrating. It's frustrating to see people who aren't even given a chance. And look, everybody in office makes mistakes. This isn't about saying, well, are they perfect or did they make mistakes? It's about the frustration with people who were trying really hard to do what they promised voters, were not given a chance, were scapegoated, and then recalled before they even got halfway into their term. And yeah, it was hard. It was hard because I got a lot of friends working in that office. Hard because I believed in a lot of the promises that were made. Hard because I know that there's a total double standard that was applied. If you look at a lot of the problems that existed in Oakland or in Alameda County more broadly that predated her administration, nobody blamed the DA for those problems until she took office. And then all of a sudden, somehow it's about the DA. So yeah, it was frustrating. It was a lot of the same people funding it that funded the recall against me. It was a lot of the same media narratives, a lot of the same lies. The same playbook, and unfortunately, it did real damage not only to criminal justice reform in the Bay Area, but also to the public perception about whether or not it's possible to achieve justice through advocating to elect district attorneys. I think that's going to set us back as a movement. I think it's going to set Alameda County back, and I think it's going to discourage a lot of young people, a lot of people of color from voting, because they feel like even when they win, rich people who didn't like the outcome just buy a new election.
Yeah. They're showing now that, 90% of campaigns that spend the most money win. I mean, that's our system is so messed up now. That's what's happening. But I mean, is this just going to keep happening to any progressive prosecutor that wins? Basically, just like the recall machine just starts right up.
Yeah, because the same things happened in Gascon and Beck. Gascon and Beck. So I mean,
yeah. So I think it's important to zoom out and look at the rules that govern elections in different jurisdictions. You're absolutely right. They tried twice to recall DA Gascon in Los Angeles County. They were not able to get enough signatures to qualify either time for the ballot. But then he just lost his reelection campaign to a very well-resourced former Republican who ran against him, claiming to be an independent. Most states don't have recalls. So it's important to remember, you look at somebody like Larry Krasner, the reform prosecutor in Philadelphia, or other places, Illinois, Florida, Texas. Recalls are not part of the state constitutional structure in those states. It's really only California, Washington, Oregon, kind of Western states that entered the Union later that wrote recall into their state constitutions. So yes, it's part of the playbook in states with recall procedures. And in states that don't have recall procedures, you see other mechanisms. So in Florida, for example, Governor Ron DeSantis, under Florida's constitution, he claims the power to summarily remove any elected official from office if he doesn't like them.
Yep.
And he did that to two reform-minded prosecutors, Andrew Warren and Monique Worrell. Kind of amazing to me that it would seem to anybody that that's a good idea or a legally permissible idea to simply remove an elected official from office without any due process, without any kind of acknowledgement of the fact that this is somebody who was elected by the voters, And one of those folks actually just won her office back. Monique Worrell just won her office back.
Wow.
I believe it's the Ninth Judicial Circuit in Florida, in the Orlando area. But DeSantis is threatening to remove her from office all over again. So you start to wonder, what message does this send to people about democracy and about the importance of voting? And I don't think it's an accident. They are very actively trying to discourage people from voting. They don't want people of color. They don't want poor people. They don't want young people to feel ownership of the political process. And so if they don't like the outcome, whether it's DeSantis removing somebody he doesn't like from office, or whether it's a billionaire, venture capitalist, real estate mogul, personally bankrolling the recall of Pamela Price, that's unfortunately become normalized. And it's to the detriment of democracy, regardless of how you feel about the individual elected officials and their policies who are being targeted.
Yeah. Definitely have to reform Citizens United. It's just totally messed up the system so bad. But it's also so interesting too, because as you've pointed out in your wonderful interview with Chris Hayes last year, that, the district attorney really doesn't have the impact that people think it does. It really, a lot of the decisions that the district attorney can make really doesn't affect crime statistics, or at least as much as people want to think. So why is there so much money in determining who is the district attorney, and why do our wealthy elites want to control that position?
Yeah, I was about to say the same thing. What's the end game? What's the end game?
Yeah, serious.
So I guess I want to make a couple of points here. The first is just to emphasize, Kevin, one of the things you said. I work at Berkeley Law School. I interact on a daily basis with researchers, professors, social scientists, scholars, and people disagree about a lot of things. But there is broad consensus that nothing any district attorney can do has a meaningful impact on crime trends in the short term. It's just not possible.
Right.
There are too many other factors, bigger factors that are outside the control of the DA that influence, what happens with regard to crime trends in the short term. And yet, people like myself, like DA Gascon, like DA Price, get blamed if crime goes up, even if it's just in one neighborhood or one category, and we get no credit when crime falls. So actually, overall, during my 2.5 years in office, reported violent crime fell by about 20%, and overall reported nonviolent or property crime fell by about 20%. Now, nobody was trying to give us credit for that, but in the month or the neighborhood or the 6 months where crime was up in one category, car thefts or burglaries, all of a sudden that's what's being focused on in the media. That's what's being blamed on us, as though somehow the policy of one person or one office is going to overnight affect crime. It's just not real. It's not what literature or research or evidence shows us. But it's a convenient way to scapegoat and to undermine the effectiveness of people whose office is threatening to vested interests. So we think a lot about district attorneys in terms of who they prosecute, what charges, and what sentences they seek. But it's equally important to remember who they don't prosecute. Because if you are a billionaire who systematically steals from the employees in your company, right? Wage theft. We know that there is more money at issue in wage theft every year in the United States than in shoplifting or burglary or all other kind of traditional property crime combined. But you don't hear anything in the news about wage theft, and you certainly don't see most prosecutors investigating or filing charges against the companies or the executives who are stealing billions of dollars from their employees. So a big part of what is at issue here with the scapegoating and with the manipulation and the fear-mongering is about ensuring that people who are powerful, corporate politicians, police officers who shoot and kill unarmed black men or who steal from drug dealers or what have you, they want to be able to continue to violate the law with impunity. And so they will fight against and to undermine anybody who has a broader vision for the role of law enforcement. Anybody who takes seriously the promise etched in stone above the U.S. Supreme Court, the promise of equal protection under law, right? If you take that seriously, if you enforce laws equally and equitably, then you are going to have to prosecute powerful people. And in the process, you're going to make very powerful enemies who are going to use every means at their disposal to scapegoat you, to undermine you, and to get back to business as usual, where it's only poor people and people of color against whom the laws are enforced.
Right.
The final thing I'll just say, which is I think a related way to understand the concept I'm describing, is that when we talk about safety, public safety, that very concept is debated and contested and negotiated. And the definition that you or I may have of public safety is probably quite different than the definition that a billionaire has. Whose safety? What kind of safety? Safety from who and from what?
Right.
And I think that's really what's at stake with some of these elections.
Man.
How much do you think the press over like say the Oakland Police Officers Union, who do you think has the most influence as far as public opinion?
I think it's hard to separate the two because obviously, the press is a diverse group. I mean, you've got Fox News and the New York Times and San Francisco Chronicle, and you have different conglomerates and outlets and reporters within them and editors. So it's a diverse group. But one thing that pretty much all of the media has in common is a need, an imperative to publish stories that get clicks, to have access to information that leads to breaking news or exclusive stories. And where you get that information from, what are the sources? If you're writing about crime or public safety issue, where do you get the information that allows you to publish that story before your competitor? Where do you get access to that information that gives you the idea that there is even a story to write in the first place? The first most upstream source of information for most local crime reporters is the police department, the police union, or the police department communications team. And those teams have tremendous influence over how public safety is reported on, what kinds of stories make it into the press, and how those stories are framed. And so what you'll see is that in cases involving a jurisdiction with a reformed prosecutor like Pamela Price or George Gascon or myself, you'll see that the stories are published very early in the life cycle of a case, sometimes before an arrest has even been made or a suspect identified. And those stories will blame the DA for whatever it is that happened. A repeat offender just got rearrested or is a suspect in a crime, was the DA's fault for letting them out or not prosecuting them aggressively enough. But then when you look at the same coverage of the same kinds of situations under what I'll call traditional or conservative DAs, either you don't see those things getting covered at all because nobody's telling the press about the rearrest or about the suspect's priors, or you're seeing it blamed on the judges for letting them out. Bail reform is the scapegoat now, or on the state legislature for not having laws that are tough enough, right? So the narrative is really determined more by the messaging the police union and police department communications teams are pushing than it is by the individual biases of any individual reporter or news outlet, in my opinion.
Yes. And I mean, that is so true about that reciprocal relationship, especially in terms of TV news. You got for TV news, they're waiting around, waiting to see if a car crash comes in, a fire, a shooting, and then they can rush to it. And the thing is that those employees, those staffers will make deals with the cops that go on the scene, the ones that are out there. I knew one shooter, as they call them, a video camera operator, who literally at KTVU, we would get free basketball tickets, like Warriors tickets, 49ers tickets, and you just take them and give them right back to the cops. So, hey, man, here you go. Remember to hit us up next time you're on a scene, make sure we can get that exclusive. And
yeah, the quid pro quo, sorry to interrupt, Kevin, the quid pro quo you're describing doesn't need to be as pernicious and unethical as what you're describing, although, of course, that happens regularly. It can be more subtle, but still very impactful. So, for example, if you're a reporter and you know that to get ahead, to get promoted, to grow your following, et cetera, you need to have exclusive stories. If a police department spokesperson gives you an exclusive, they say, hey, I'm giving you a tip on this before we issue our press release. Here's what's happening. We just made the arrest in this big case, or we just identified a suspect, or whatever the thing is, right? You're going to write a story that is much more sympathetic to the person or agency that's giving you that information. Right. And it's going to happen for two reasons. One is the kind of quid pro quo you just described. If you write a good story that they like, good for them, they'll give you the next one. If you write a story that attacks them or undermines them or makes them or their team look bad, they're not giving you the next story. So that's one thing. But the other thing is you have limited information. And if your sole source of information is giving you information framed in a very particular context, then even if you're the most ethical, well-meaning reporter in the world, guess what? You haven't heard the other side of the story. You don't know what the other information is. You can't possibly write a nuanced, fair, and balanced article because you only have one perspective. And guess what? If you say to the reporter, or you say to the police department communications agent, well, hey, thanks for that lead. I'm going to have to wait a couple of days while I do follow-up investigation, talk to other people. They say, I'm giving the story to somebody else. We need the story out today.
Yeah.
And if you say, okay, but I need to call and, I need to ask so-and-so. No. This is embargoed. This is an embargoed story until 2 p.m. If you run it before 2 p.m. or talk to people about it, we can't give you any information. We have to take everything we said off the record, what have you, right? Very, very controlled release of information in ways that guarantees favorable coverage. And they have access to information about public safety issues way before even the DA does.
Yes. I was actually once punished for basically, we had the cop side of the story on this one attack in San Francisco, but then I also got a witness statement. Basically, the victim that was involved in the fight, also wrote about it on social media, and I confirmed that it was the person that was involved, and I got punished because I added to the police narrative. I mean, that's the kind of stuff you run into when working with police. It's insane. But it also brings up a very, very important question. I guess a very important moment especially during your tenure, of that Heather Knight hit piece. That was the
which one of them?
Exactly. Oh my God, the worst, especially under the protection of, oh well, she's an opinion writer. But the one about where they talk about the case where Brooke Jenkins wanted to go harder on the attacker, the guy that killed his mom. And basically, and then you guys didn't let her do it, even though it turned out, that it was the family's decision. You were listening to the victim's family, and Heather Knight knew this and did not report this.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of problems with that story. I mean, first of all, let me just say that the Court of Appeal in that case found that Brooke Jenkins committed prosecutor misconduct and was unethical in her prosecution of the case. So I had an obligation to try to rein her in because she was doing things which the Court of Appeal later ruled in a published opinion was unethical. And as the head of the office, I had to make sure that the prosecutors who prosecuted cases in my name and the name of the people of the city and county of San Francisco followed the law. And she was not doing that. Of course, that didn't make it into Heather Knight's story. But second of all, Jenkins lied and said that I'd never discussed the case with her. Not true. We had multiple lengthy conversations. Third of all, she lied, and Heather Knight repeated these lies, demonstrably false lies, that what we were doing, as you said, violated the wishes of the family, when in fact we had a large group of family members who were begging us to allow the defendant to spend the rest of his life in a mental hospital instead of in a prison. And in some ways, even more significantly to the dishonesty and the false narrative in this whole story is that, putting aside for the moment the particular wishes of this family, which was divided. There was one family member that was really pushing for prison. The court-appointed experts who had evaluated the defendant, not hired by the defense, but the people that the court had independently appointed to evaluate the mental competency of the person we were prosecuting, had agreed that he should go to a mental hospital, not a prison. And it was in large part based on those independent recommendations that I was saying, in conjunction with the request of the victim's family, that I had concerns about the approach Jenkins chose to take. And it wasn't just me; it was the Court of Appeals that ultimately found her approach to that case to be unethical.
And of course, that's the stuff that doesn't make it out, does it?
And we could keep going about the dishonesty. I mean, the headline in that article was that she was a progressive prosecutor. There's nothing progressive about what she's done in office or about what she planned to do in office. But saying that was good branding, and the Chronicle knew it. Heather Knight knew it. Brooke Jenkins knew it. The recall people knew it. The other thing they didn't mention, of course, in that article or any other article, was that Jenkins was getting paid by the people who were financing the recall, and yet claiming to be a volunteer. The whole article was that she quit her job and was going to have no income because she felt so strongly about changing the direction of the office that she worked in. But in reality, she was getting paid about $300,000 on an annual basis to be the spokesperson for the recall and lie and say she was a volunteer.
I gotta love it. Well, that brings up another question. So with Price as well, you have prosecutor staffers that basically turn on the district attorneys and act as, sources for the campaigns, recalling and stuff. I mean, how do you fix that? How do you fix basically a mutiny as soon as you come into office? Can you just go in and clear staff and make sure? Because it seems like that's practically impossible.
The short answer is it really depends on the particular jurisdiction and what the rules are. There are jurisdictions like Los Angeles County where the lawyers in the DA's office have civil service, and it is basically impossible to fire them under any circumstance, even blatant, direct insubordination. There are jurisdictions like Alameda County where the assistant district attorneys have good cause protection. They can't be fired unless there's first a good cause hearing. That's a lower standard than civil service protection, but it still can be challenging to fire people. And then there are jurisdictions like San Francisco where most of the attorneys are what are called at-will employees, where they can be fired for any reason as long as it's not a discriminatory or impermissible reason. If you are elected as a DA in a place like San Francisco or some other jurisdictions, then it is common to come in and fire people that you think will actively undermine your administration and hire people who you think will help you achieve the campaign promises that got you elected. In places like Alameda and LA, it's very challenging. I would also say that there's a separate kind of broader conversation that I think is important just to remember, which is, first of all, we should absolutely protect the rights, the First Amendment rights of employees to be whistleblowers if they think there's unlawful or unethical behavior occurring. We should absolutely protect and respect the First Amendment rights of employees to criticize the government agencies in which they work. And yet, we also should remember that if we allow, as has happened in LA, civil service staff to sue their own boss to prevent his policies that he campaigned on from going into effect, to undermine any effort whatsoever to implement changes that voters overwhelmingly supported, then you have to ask the question, who's really in charge? And why are we bothering to elect people to be DAs if it's the labor unions that represent or that rank and file individual employees in their office that control what policies can or cannot be implemented? I think it's a real question and a real challenge that we saw squarely presented with the ways in which the rank and file in Los Angeles County were able to publicly, repeatedly, and directly sabotage DA Gascon's ability to fulfill promises that voters had very transparently and clearly elected him to achieve.
So who do you think is making calls? Like, if it's not the union, and it seems like real estate interests are sometimes involved. So who is inspiring people to sabotage the endeavors?
Yeah, I think it depends on the particular jurisdiction and the context. I think sometimes it is a police union or a deputy district attorney union, lead who is advocating for this. Sometimes it's the news media that's looking to get clicks and stir up stories, and so they're recruiting sources and asking for leaks. Sometimes you have an organized recall effort or impeachment effort, and you get operatives from the political action groups or from the state legislature who are reaching out and kind of recruiting sources within the office. I think it really varies depending on the particular play that's being used against the elected official. But one of the things that's sort of a common feature is that when there is a well-resourced, high-profile campaign to undermine or remove an elected official, it makes them more vulnerable. It makes it more likely that criticisms will get covered by the press, and it makes it more likely that people within the office will feel emboldened to leak information, even confidential information, in an effort to make their office or elected official look bad. And so when you see people under, for example, Brooke Jenkins, the DA in San Francisco right now, when you see people going to the press with criticisms of her from within the office, overwhelmingly the press says we're not interested in that story and doesn't run the story. And then there may be retaliation against people if the office leadership identifies those sources. So that's the kind of thing that just would never happen under DA Price. If anybody in the office went to the press under DA Price or during my administration and said, hey, we're upset about this policy or practice, we have a concern about this new management function, whatever it may be, you can be guaranteed somebody in the press is covering that story. And so anybody who wants to get their name out there, who, like Brooke Jenkins, wants to be the DA and sees an opportunity to leapfrog and get promoted without actually having to go and win an election to take office, hey, there's an opportunity, right? Free media, free exposure, a big platform of wealthy donors who are going to amplify you and your message with stories like the one Heather Knight did on it. That wasn't an accident, right? That was orchestrated by the recall to launch Brooke Jenkins' political career. Somebody they were paying, who they knew was lying to the public and saying she was a volunteer, somebody who had illegally, criminally emailed criminal offender record information rap sheets to personal email accounts, somebody who was and continues to be unethical, but who would never prosecute corrupt politicians or billionaires or police officers, somebody who would instead scapegoat poor working people of color. And that's exactly what they wanted, and that's what they got.
Yes. Oh, and I like it. Oh, sorry. Did you want to say something, Scott?
Oh, no, I'm just agreeing.
Yeah, and like in the case of Pamela Price, you had one of her prosecutors who was fired, basically give an exclusive to the Berkeley Scanner, which, basically set up that publication as well. So now, too, like in that case, you actually have like publications even popping up to support these narratives, which is so terrible. But it's so now I think the big question is, and I think a big kind of motivator behind the recall is basically your promises to hold accountable bad cops. I mean, especially after the Mario Woods shooting, like we needed, people to step up, and you were willing to do that. But it seemed, admittedly, I knew cops are going to push back after, I think it was when there's that video clip of after you won, how you actually there's an audience going, fuck the cops, fuck the cops. I was like, oh no, you're poking a bear. You're poking a bear. Don't do this, you know.
To be clear, I wasn't. To be clear, I was not on stage when that happened. I wasn't in the room when that happened. So I had no control over it. I didn't think it was helpful or appropriate. They weren't saying the cops either. The people who were chanting that at the event were talking about the police union in particular.
Yeah.
And the reason for that anger was, I mean, look, at the time that happened, I think the San Francisco Police Officers Association had something like 20 or 25% favorability polling in San Francisco. But the folks at that event were chanting that. And again, I wasn't in the room. I wouldn't have encouraged it or condoned it or participated in it had I been there. But I think the attitude was based in part on the really offensive, dishonest campaign that the Police Officers Association funded in the last month of a hard-fought race, in which in 1 month, they spent as much money attacking me as we spent on everything in our campaign in the whole year.
Wow.
They spent about $750,000 in 1 month in TV and mail that was spreading lies and fear-mongering and using racist tropes to attack me. And of course, the real reason was because of a fear that we would come in and actually enforce laws against police officers when they committed crimes.
Yes.
That's what it was about. And people were angry at that kind of a heavy-handed, dishonest, fear-mongering approach and the amount of money that they dumped into the campaign, not in favor of any candidate, not in favor of any values or policies or ideals, but simply to attack reform and a champion of reform. And so people were angry about that, and I think understandably so, even though the reaction and the particular word choice was frustrating and problematic and unfortunate. The reality is we can't have a criminal justice system where the public knows that police can commit crimes with impunity. And that's all too often what we have. And the problem is that about 99% of cases that prosecutors bring rely as the primary witnesses on police officers. Mm-hmm. And if the public thinks that police can get away with lying, stealing, killing with no consequences, it becomes very difficult to persuade juries in many of the regular run-of-the-mill criminal cases that they should believe the prosecutors and the police officers who are telling them this is what happened, this is what the witness said, this is how I gathered the evidence, etc. And so I was a firm believer in police accountability, not only because I believe in equal enforcement of the law, but also because I think we need to get to a place where the general public trusts the police more than they do today. And yeah, how do we get there? How do we get there? And you have communities in San Francisco where there will be a shooting in the middle of the day and nobody will call the police. How are we supposed to keep our communities safe if people don't trust the police enough to pick up the phone and dial 911 when there's a shooting?
Mm-hmm. Right. I know, especially if the cops do show up, you never know what they're going to do even.
Yeah, somebody else to get shot.
Yeah, exactly. The wrong person could be blamed for it.
Yeah.
But why and it's so insane too, especially now that it's been revealed that the president of the San Jose Police Union was actually selling fentanyl and taking that money and donating it to your recall campaign. I mean, why are police unions so against accountability? I mean, you would think even too, for their own reputations. I mean, is it just that thin blue line? Is it just that it's only us together, we don't care what anyone says? I mean, or is it just truly there's this belief that, well, in order for us to do our job, sometimes we got to be evil, just like on The Shield,
I don't know. I think it's different things. I mean, fundamentally, most labor unions, not just police unions, are going to go to bat for their members, and that's part of their mandate and their mission. And if sometimes their members do things that are unfortunate or illegal, and good labor unions stand up to protect their own, and that's part of their mandate. So I understand that aspect of it. But it is frustrating when you see a group that is empowered with so many billions of dollars, and with the power to arrest and the power to carry a gun and discharge a gun. And it's a tremendous responsibility, and it's a difficult job. I want to be clear. Being a police officer is not an easy job. Many people don't want that job for a lot of reasons. It can be scary. It can be dangerous. Under the best of circumstances, it is hard. You're making split-second decisions with imperfect information under tremendous scrutiny. And yeah, sometimes people make mistakes. And also sometimes people who take that job are people who are going to engage in systematic racist behavior or systematic brutality. And when that happens, it is so damaging to the rule of law, to public trust in the justice system, to police themselves. In fact, it makes all of the honest, hardworking, good police officers, it puts them at more risk. It makes their jobs more difficult when there's a bad apple or two or three that are breaking the law and getting away with it. And imagine how devastating to your morale if you're a police officer who joined for all the right reasons, to protect and serve, to find a way to courageously give back and fight crime in your community, and that's what's motivating you when you decide to become a police officer. And now imagine that your first partner when you join the force is stealing from all the people he searches, taking cash out of their wallets, and inventing the legal justification for the stop or the arrest in his police reports, just inventing it. And you see him do it and get away with it over and over and over and over again. And now you start to feel like you're the idiot. Like, why am I the one who's not getting rich out here? Why am I the one who is having to let people go because I didn't have a legal basis to stop them or what have you? It's demoralizing. And that's another reason why I think it's so critical that prosecutors step up and play a role in getting bad actors off the streets and out of uniform. And when they abdicate that duty, they not only undermine public trust, they not only undermine the ability to secure convictions in traditional criminal cases, but they also isolate and alienate the officers who join the force for all the right reasons and who should be our champions and our heroes.
Yes. Yeah. And especially you saw that with the riders. Is that you, Scott, that I'm getting the feedback from?
Yeah, sorry. I think so.
Yeah.
Let me see. I'm still backstage.
Yeah, weird. Okay, now I don't hear it. Okay, cool. So you saw that same thing with Oakland and the riders, and especially too, the worst part is when you had good cops trying to step up and try to stop this. I mean, because this truly damaged the reputation in the Oakland Police Department. The worst part is the good cops were the one that got punished. You know, the good cops are the ones that are taken down. And then if you don't do anything about that lawlessness, you got like what happened in Kansas City, the Kansas City Police Department with the one cop that was sexually harassing black women and then actually kind of getting involved with pimping them out. I mean, terrible, terrible stuff. But that's what happens if you don't rein them in. But at that same time, when you get in a good prosecutor, a progressive prosecutor, you also run into things like the blue flu. Suddenly, cops don't want to do their jobs. And specifically with you, I mean, you had video of a patrol car watching a burglary happen and the officers not do anything because the blue flu, they wanted to hurt you. Now, do you feel that there can be any actions taken? Can there be anything done to stop the blue flu when a prosecutor wins that isn't favorable or isn't the police union's favorite?
Sure. I mean, I think it's like anything. Running a big agency, a police department has challenges, and I don't think these are easy things to turn around, even if the police chief is really determined to do it. But I think you have to have accountability metrics like you do for any other. Public school teachers now get evaluated based on test scores and graduation rates, and there are metrics that exist that can evaluate the productivity of the police department. And there are lots of different metrics, and we can argue about which are the best ones, which ones should we prioritize, what kind of vision do we have for policing? But it's just indisputable that we have data. So I'll give you a couple of examples of the kinds of things we could look at and where we could demand performance and accountability in exchange for generous budgets for police. One common category that police use to evaluate their own effectiveness is response time. How long does it take them after being notified of a crime in progress to get to the scene? Mm-hmm. And I would hope and expect that that's a shorter amount of time for a violent crime in progress than for a property crime. I would hope that it would be a shorter period of time in a small jurisdiction like San Francisco, where the distances to travel are always relatively small. From any one police precinct to any one point in the city, it's going to be no more than a mile. Whereas, in some parts of the country, you may have much bigger distances to travel. So these are all things that can be factored into our analysis. There's another category that people who look at police productivity and effectiveness often track, and police themselves track. It's called clearance rate. It's the rate at which police solve or close reported crimes. And you can go to the San Francisco Police Department data dashboard. You can look up their own numbers, and you can go back in time. And I want to just tell you, because I have these numbers in front of me, if you compare the first half of 2022, when I was being recalled, right, the 6 months up to and including my recall, with the first 6 months of 2019, right, the year before I took off, same time period, January through July, 2019 compared to 2022. According to the police department's own data, they had a 42% decrease in solving rapes from 2020 compared to 2022. Now, it's not just rape, robbery, one of the most common violent crimes in San Francisco, 41% decrease. Assault, 19% decrease. Human trafficking, 53% decrease. Burglary, 47% decrease. Motor vehicle theft, 29% decrease. Arson, 55% decrease. Larceny, theft, shoplifting, auto burglaries, 48% decrease. In every single category that they tracked, they had high double-digit decline in the rate at which they were solving reported crimes. But what's even crazier is that during that same time period, their budget increased significantly, and the number of crimes that were reported also decreased significantly. So you tell me, how is it with more money and 20% fewer crimes, you're solving 50% fewer cases of human trafficking, 50% fewer cases of burglary? That's the kind of thing where I don't care. You can want criminal justice reform or not want criminal justice reform. You can like D.A. Boudin or dislike D.A. Boudin. This is just basic good governance and responsible use of tax dollars. You have got to demand accountability from every government agency, from every public sector employee, whether they wear a uniform, teach in a classroom, put out fires, staff our public hospitals. And here the metrics make very clear that during the 6 months prior to my recall, the San Francisco Police Department was absolutely and blatantly engaged in a work stoppage.
They just don't care. They just don't care.
Yeah, that's the thing. They just don't care. Like it's so disturbing. I mean, that they could just sacrifice other people's lives. That regular people are just pawns. I mean, that's so disturbing.
And I'll say it a little bit differently. I think some absolutely do care. I've met a lot of police officers who care tremendously and who, as I said, are doing a difficult job under difficult circumstances. But the thing that a lot of them care about, a lot of officers care about, is politics. They care about who the DA is. And what's problematic from my perspective is that a quintessential defining aspect of any democracy is elected civilian control over armed forces. Mm-hmm. And so if we are giving our police officers guns and high-powered weaponry, military-grade weaponry, if we're giving them, the power to arrest people, the power to patrol, to drive at high speeds, to do all these things that are a critical part of policing and responding to crime in modern urban America, we have to ensure that the policies and practices that those police use are chosen not by the police union, but rather by elected civilian officials. And if police can simply say, we don't like the person who was elected DA or mayor or supervisor, and therefore we are going to engage in a active systematic sabotage or undermining of that elected official and their policies, again, it's sort of what we were talking about with rank and file in prosecutors' offices. Why bother having elections if we're going to give the police department or the police union a veto over the kinds of policies and practices that can be implemented? That is not consistent or compatible with democracy to allow armed forces, whether the military or local police departments, to choose their own policy guidelines, to choose their own elected officials. No, voters choose, and the police implement those policies. And if they dislike them, then you know what? Wait till the next election, show up and vote like everybody else.
Yes.
Yeah. But do your job. Do your job.
Do your job. Yeah, and that's there's also there's also a debate to be had on whether or not police should even be able to unionize, especially if they're public services, because their job is so singular in a way, as much as I love union and unionizations, it seems like in this case, it's used against the people, which is a big problem.
And some people will make the argument that they should be allowed to unionize, but that there should be certain guardrails on what those unions can do and advocate for. So, for example, we pushed when I was DA for a rule that would prohibit elected district attorneys from accepting contributions from police unions if they're investigating potential crimes committed by those union members. We also pushed, for example, or some folks have advocated for rules that would limit the ability of police unions to demand meet and confer over any new policy that gets implemented. So you want to use body cameras? Well, we've got to wait 3 years while that process gets negotiated as part of a meet and confer labor contract issue. No, that's not a labor contract issue. That's an issue about oversight of police departments, about evidentiary gathering. That's something that the police chief or the mayor or the police accountability board can decide as a matter of policy without input from the labor union. But in most jurisdictions, you see these kinds of policy decisions getting bogged down by meet and confer requirements that the union exercises as both a sword and a shield to prevent policy change or criminal justice reform.
Yeah, totally. Now, Scott, do you mind if I ask this kind of last question? Because we should start wrapping up. And
absolutely, man.
Okay, appreciate it. So the one last question, it's kind of a whole different thing, but I do think you'll have an important opinion to express on this. So we recently just saw someone go and shoot the CEO of United Healthcare on the street.
Yeah.
And, there's a lot of kind of cheering for it on the left, understandably, because you could say that, no matter what that person was in their family life or something, they did a lot of damage and hurt a lot of people. But it's kind of seems to be maybe a signal, maybe even there might be some kind of left in violence coming back like we had in the 70s, and you, I would say, was an unintended victim of this when the left was much more revolutionary. Your parents were involved with an armed robbery and they went to prison for a long time. And I mean, it affected you. You were 14 months old when that happened. And the impact on you, I would say, is, when I was listening to that interview with you and Chris Hayes, you kept referring to your parents as your birth parents. And understandably, because Bill Ayers and Bernadette Dorn are the ones that actually raised you. But still, there's, they still tried to be in your life and they're still like your parents, So I just kind of want to talk about what you want to tell people, say like, hey, shooting CEOs, let's bring back, let's bring back the violent left, let's make them scared again. I want you to kind of talk about the kind of impact that maybe people aren't thinking about, because you truly really felt the negative. It seems to have really hurt your relationship with your parents.
Yeah, I mean, no question. Having my dad spend 40 years in prison and my mom 22 years, that hurt our relationship. Absolutely right. I was still breastfeeding. I could barely, take my first step when my parents were arrested. So,
wow.
Parental incarceration has devastating consequences for the children left behind, and there are millions of kids in this country who will experience parental incarceration at some point in their childhood, and it's one of the really massive often underappreciated consequences of our addiction to jails and prisons. Charles Blow in the New York Times had a great op-ed earlier this week, about the sort of unseen victims of mass incarceration. Now, speaking of victims, I think it's really unfortunate that anybody is celebrating the murder or political violence in this way, to the extent it's political. I still don't know who, I don't think anybody knows what the motive was. But there are lots of reasons why people should be outraged at United Healthcare and the way that it systematically delays and denies paying valid insurance claims. It's unacceptable. It's outrageous, and for a company to make its profits and pay its shareholder dividends on the backs of sick, injured, dying Americans who've paid their insurance premiums and who are entitled to medical claims being paid, and yet that is not and cannot be a legal justification for committing a cold-blooded murder. And I think it's really important to remember that we have to take the high road, that political violence begets more violence, that even when people do things that are bad, that are amoral, that are unethical, that are illegal, in roles like CEO of a big company that has massive, widespread impacts on folks, they also have families, that they also have people they leave behind in their community, that all of us are much more than our worst mistake. And I think when we start losing sight of that, we start losing sight of the values that make this country great. We start losing sight of the values that bring together progressive democratic coalitions. And I think we find it harder and harder to separate ourselves from the folks that we're criticizing. So I would just loudly and unequivocally condemn violence, even when used against people that we have every reason to dislike and to fight against. I think we've got to find better, more effective ways than using violence of any kind.
Yes, that's totally. Well, I mean, do you mind wrapping up with, I just want to know, do you still believe in the system? Do you think there still could be good coming from this system, no matter how much has been corrupted by money?
Absolutely. Look, we can't be naive about the challenges, the obstacles, or the resistance that we're going to face. None of it should be a surprise. This is a country that at its founding wrote slavery into the Constitution. It took a massive civil war to end slavery. There are deep-pocketed, powerful interests that are going to fight every step of the way against change, against giving up power, against democratizing our approach to governance, against accountability for folks in power when they commit crimes. So it's not a surprise that folks like myself or Diego Gascon or others we've talked about are seeing headwinds, are seeing resistance. If anybody expected that one election or one news cycle or one 4-year period, one term in office would be enough to fix the problems that we're confronting, that's just naive. I mean, it took centuries to build up these systems. Mass incarceration didn't just appear overnight, and we're not going to solve it overnight or in a year or 4 years. It's going to take a long, sustained effort. It's going to take commitment. It's going to take creativity. It's going to take cooperation. It's going to take a big tent and building coalitions with folks we don't always see eye to eye with. And it's going to take accepting some defeats along the way and recognizing that the path towards progress is not linear. Right. There will be setbacks. There will be backslide. And if we give up hope and just say, you know what, this system's not for me, or we're going to be cynical, then guess what? The Donald Trumps of the world are ready and willing to take advantage to enrich themselves and their friends. So we have got to stay vigilant. We've got to stay engaged, and we've got to use the time when we're not in power or when the pendulum seems to be swinging against us. We've got to use that time effectively to strategize, to build coalitions, to come up with proactive, visionary solutions to the problems affecting our communities, so that when there are political openings, when there is space for reform, we are ready to go, not just with criticisms of the status quo, but with solutions.
Right on.
Wonderful. Exactly. I couldn't put it better. And man, so thank you so much, Chesa, for coming on. This is such an honor. I really appreciate it so much.
Yeah, learned a lot, brother. Appreciate it.
There's so much to learn from this man. Hopefully you'll come on again. Of course, open forum. Always welcome. And that's it for this episode of the Doomloop Dispatch. Follow us on all the socials, X, TikTok, Instagram. We're all over there. And please support our Patreon to help with our StreamYard.
Yeah, please. Come on, guys. Come on. Just dig a little bit. Just dig a little.
Think of us as a charity. We're a good charity. And we got to let Chesa get to his meeting. So we're going to say, keep fighting the good fight.
Keep fighting the good fight.
Thanks, gentlemen. Have a good one.
You too.